All right, well, we're going to do we're going to cover some history first, but this is going to be smart contracts more from a functional perspective. We have a lot of people here who deal with the technical side of it and encourage, a lot of exploration in that. We'll touch on the various parts, but this, when you leave here, you should have a good idea of what it's going to be like to execute smart contracts today and kind of going forward. And what are some of the risks about this, and what are some of the things that we're going to start watching for? So let's go to the first slide. So we have to cover what is a contract, because there are no smart contracts without a contract. Even today, when you log on and you're executing something through a website, you have a terms of service, you have a privacy policy, you have a lot of things that you're already governed by. If you're working with a fintech organization or some sort of financial institution, you've got contracts, because if we want smart contracts to be adopted where there's lots of money, we're going to have to assure the risk. We're going to have to take the risk out of it, because in finance, risk and reward are a teeter-totter. If you have a lot of risk, you're going to get low return to low reward. When you de-risk something, you actually create liquidity. You create the ability for something to have value. And the reason that we have a smart contract is the hope is to reduce transaction costs, right? This is the thing that is going to make money flow better. Water always seeks the lowest point. Finance always seeks the lowest cost. And so that's what a smart contract is going to enable us to do. So in the world of a contract, you've got four basic parts. And the reason that this is the case is it's enforceable by law. In a minute, we're going to cover sovereign risk. What does it mean to have sovereign risk? But just know that anybody operating a financial contract needs to know there's enforceability. If somebody doesn't do what they say they're going to do, I need to have an enforcement agent, and it's not the 38 in my drawer, right? I mean, we need other civil means to as a society to settle disputes. So all contracts are enforceable by law. All smart contracts at this time, and we can get into a debate about this, are governed by law. Of that, you've got the offer and acceptance, you've got consideration, capacity, and legality. When we get to capacity and legality, those are some areas that when we take it into smart contracts are really going to be interesting battlegrounds and interesting things that we're going to solve, and we're going to look to technology to solve that, because these are going to be some really difficult problems. So then you say, what is a smart contract? Simply put, it's a computer program that can automatically execute the operative terms of a contract when certain conditions are met, potentially taking a lot of human involvement, we call that cost, out of completing a deal and reducing costs in a variety of ways. The important thing about operative term there, the reason that that's green, in a kind of try to stand over here a little bit. In a contract, you have operative terms and non-operative terms. Non-operative terms are if Carlos and I decide to, if Juan and I decide to sign a contract, we're going to first of all pick a legality. Like, what venue are we going to have? Is this going to be in Delaware? He lives in Mexico. Is it going to be U.S.? Is it going to be Mexico? We've got to determine some things about this contract that are non-operative. And so those kinds of things don't need a mechanism. They don't need anything to operate. But then when we make a basis of exchange and I say, well, when you deliver 100 pounds of avocados, what will I pay? These are what we call operative terms. So smart contracts are really good at distinguishing and getting into the operative terms, but we still have this need for an off-chain contract where we cover all the non-operative terms. Just a quick history, just so you catch up. In the 80s, we had derivatives markets. We had these automatically executing derivatives contract, which is really kind of the basis. Then what happens is Nick Szabo comes along in 1998 and starts to have the concept of the contract, as it were, when he invents Bitcoin Gold, and the idea that there is these puzzles that you solve, and anyway, how the gold is delivered. So he really creates it there. And then in 2015, we have kind of the formalization as it comes out in Ethereum. And that's kind of how this has been coming along. So it's not necessarily a new concept, but it is important to understand. We've been dealing with this for a while. Okay, now we're going to get into the good stuff. So how is a smart contract risky? And by the way, these are elements of a smart contract, but that's something to keep in mind. First of all, the oracle. So what is an oracle? An oracle is nothing more than a point of information over which you decide an operative term. So if we need to know, in a lease contract, a lot of times you'll have LIBOR. You'll have some index that you're going to evaluate annually the price of a lease. You'll say, well, if the principal rate of interest in whatever index we decide on goes up, then my lease will go up. This is similar to an oracle. There's some really interesting things going on right now. The state of Washington has been enforcing a lot of the freedom of speech laws, which are heavily protected, but they have gone further as a state to create very special laws that protect people from publishing, or protect them while they publish, points of information. And so oracles that are protected is going to be important. If we decide a smart contract on an oracle that's fictitious or phony or is co-opted or otherwise molested in some way and doesn't give us the right information, then the contract is off. So this is part of what we're also getting into, we'll cover in a minute, when we try to insure a smart contract. Because if we're talking about a contract for millions of dollars, which is what we hope that smart contracts get adopted. We hope that our industry is relevant to the world. And there are trillions and trillions of dollars that trade annually, right? And so the ability to have an oracle as a basis of decision is really important. So Washington State is taking some actions about this. There are a lot of interesting things going on, but choosing the right oracle in a contract can be very, very important. Additionally, where is the oracle being stored? Which protocol are you housing it in? Are you housing it in an immutable way? LIBOR was published everywhere in all the papers. You could find it easily. As we say, the atoms were affixed to paper, and so it became a distributed ledger. But even that was corrupted. So then who checks these things? Are we going to develop automated checks, right? I think in Circle's latest stablecoin, they've announced that they're going to do monthly audits to try to prove to you that the value of the exchange or the value of the currency is actually backed up by the dollars that represent that stablecoin, right? So we're starting to get into the idea that the oracle, these things over which we decide contracts over, are very important. So this is a coming issue, and we're going to see more and more things be oracleized, right? I mean, like even today, there really isn't a place where you can go grab a FedEx number in a way that's immutable. You could go to the FedEx site. If let's say you position the contract such that it executes on a FedEx delivery. If you needed that proof of tracking and the signature as a signed event by the receiver in order for the seller to be paid, you'd have a problem because the FedEx site isn't today oracleized. There's no oracle for that, right? You have to use a non-immutable source, and can you go back in time and prove it if there were an issue of legality, right? So oracles are really important. We're all making a lot of discoveries about identity. I had a big discovery about identity about 3 months ago. I'm an accountant, as I think Jay pointed out. So I have to do things like understand is Factum going to be auditable for certain standards, SOC 1, SOC 2, Sarbanes-Oxley, FASB. There's lots of standards that we all have to live up to as an enterprise. And as I was going through some of the different protocols, I've discovered that not all identities on protocols are auditable. If I want to sell my car or my lawnmower and I do the two-factor authentication that we're all used to, which is I get you on the phone, you send me a little bit of whatever cryptocurrency it is, and I confirm the 8 decimal place amount of currency that I just received. You say, okay, great, send me the $1,000 or send me the whatever, and so we're done, right? Well, that works as long as I don't have to prove your identity. The minute that I'm involved in a transaction in, let's say, overseas, so Jose and I are going back and forth, and so excuse me, one. I keep messing that up. One. We're involved in a transaction, but it's across borders. There's a governmental agency called FinCEN. The difference with FinCEN and a lot of the other government agencies is I go to jail when FinCEN shows up, as opposed to just getting fined. So FinCEN is kind of important to me and the Bank Securities Act. So it's a big deal. But if they show up, I have to be able to prove the identity. And I may have to prove that I'm not laundering money, so the AML laws, anti-money laundering, or it could be that I have a KYC issue under the Patriot Act to make sure that somebody's not defrauding me in the exchange. So these are really, really important things when it comes to identity. So it's really important that we're able to take the proof of who you are and put that into the blockchain. When we can do that and we can affix that information, and then we can trace that back to the contracts that have been signed in a smart contract, that's where we start to have real power. Not all protocols are built like that. Some protocols, and you find this a lot where a protocol was developed for value, some sort of currency. And when you have a currency, it necessarily isn't built for data. Maybe it can accommodate data, but to what degree and to what accuracy can it accommodate data? These are very important things when we start to consider enterprise level contracts. Because if we're picking protocols that don't support the auditability standards, it's really, really difficult. Factum was very lucky in that we just hosted a 2-hour smart contract symposium at Northwestern University up in Chicago. We had the head of audit from PwC, who actually built the first patented blockchain assurance model. That means audit for the rest of us. So they built this model for actually auditing blockchain, but they also have a continuous audit software package that can be installed at corporations. And we had the head of the ICO markets for Perkins Coie, and we had Paul Snow. We had a very long conversation. It'll be available soon on the website. But one of these issues was talking about the auditability. So the industry is aware of it, and I think this will be one of those things that matures. And as it matures, it's going to be very interesting to see, because that thing about legal enforcement, and we'll get into sovereignty in a minute, but it's got to be a contract that's going to stand up. It's going to be something that will survive as we go forward. Picking the protocol, I think we've kind of touched on this, but what is relevant about that protocol? We're all making a lot of, come on in, Daryl. Sorry, that's one of the guys I work with. That's Daryl. He's a great guy. So one of the things about the protocol is it self-executing or not? Are there self-executing layers to this? And when you get to execution methods, which is the next point about these smart contracts, it's also very important. So how are the contracts going to be signed? I was having a conversation with someone outside recently, and we were talking about, is DocuSign going to be a credible element in a smart contract, right? So we've got this thing where we have these old world methods of execution. Do I take a picture of it? Do I scan it? Is the scan of that document now part of the smart contract? Is that something that I can use to actually trade this basis? These are real issues that we're going to have to solve. Immutability is the predominance in blockchain, right? That we have provenance. That's the issue. Because if we can prove this long term, then we get to this place. Factum just recently was actually named in a dispute in China where a certain person had copyright over a document, took it to court, the plaintiff couldn't disprove it, and the judge cited the fact that the Factum blockchain was used as the method for deciding that this document had provenance and therefore provability, and therefore it was decided because of the blockchain information. And the High Court in China went on to write that blockchain, immutable blockchain information that has provenance is something we can actually use to decide how disputes are won. So it's this method of execution and picking the right protocol somewhat go hand in hand, but it's going to be interesting as we start to look at the different ways that we can do this. The value in the exchange, we're now seeing with atomic swaps and a lot of other protocols out there, how do we decide what's going to be acceptable? Oftentimes, longer contracts that don't settle in the moment, something that isn't arbitrage, for instance, that isn't settled out immediately, values change, things move, stable coins change. Tether just dropped to 92 cents, then shot up to $1.06. So we've got variability in these things. We've got value methods that exist in digital arenas that don't necessarily match. Or what are we going to do to bring fiat into smart contracts? Can we execute across it? From the financial world, I can tell you that it's very possible to design a smart contract that has a bank exchange like an ACH or an ETF as a part of the execution. The hard part is I can't prove that the bank delivered the money. I can't prove that there were a finality to the contract, and that if I'm the buyer and I have a duty to an obligation to pay, I can't prove that payment was delivered, and that's a really important thing. I mean, that's a lot of what we think about in fraud and just business today is fraud in the digital world as well. So when we look at risk, it just has this wrinkle in it, because now with a check, I have a signed instrument, I'm going to get something back. I can prove that somebody cashed it, right? Oftentimes, a signed check is the proof in a de facto contract, right? If I make a loan, if I do anything, I could write the term on the bottom of the check. That's an instrument. It's valid as it is. So the tricky part now becomes if I mix the on-chain, and we'll talk about this in a second, but when I mix the on-chain world with the off-chain world, how do I prove the off-chain world happened, right? This is the problem we're having with stablecoins at the moment. This is that problem where, great, it's backed up by gold. How do I know the gold is gold? How do I know the gold isn't tungsten wrapped and, we used a 3D printer with a digital image that we took from the hashed image and we made a stamp that looked exactly like the stamp that was in the last bar, and when the camera went out, I did the old swaparoo, and bingo, now I've got less gold than I think backs up the stablecoin, right? Or whatever. So these are problems that we're starting to face when we talk about the value of exchange. Counterparty risk. Oh my God. Did anybody catch the zero knowledge proof discussion yesterday? Yeah, quite fascinating, right? So there are certain zero knowledge proofs that when you execute them, if you didn't hide the genesis block well enough, and in mathematics, we talk about pseudo security or pseudo anonymity, because with math, all things are possible. We now quantify things in terms of a post-quantum world and a pre-quantum world, meaning, with quantum computers, what's discoverable. So when we talk about counterparty risk, we hope that a lot of this technology in smart contracts is used to do international business. There's $3 trillion every year that takes 60 days or longer to transact because documents have to go from me to you, and they have to come from you back to me, and we don't really know each other. So the US isn't quite as bad. If anybody's done business in India or China, what you know is got to have a corporate seal, the signature pages, right? There's a lot of validity going on because there's a lot of fraud that's possible when you don't know the other person. So one of the issues here in dealing with the counterparty risk is, do I have a real counterparty? How much money am I going to exchange if I don't know this person or I can't prove this person? And is the risk in the protocol, or is the risk in the way that person represents themselves? With a zero knowledge proof, I can fake information. I can make information in some zero knowledge proofs, to be fair, right? Not all, but some. Unless you dig into this and you know and you can assure the mathematics, you may not know who your counterparty is, or the credibility of the counterparty, or if I've even faked the money, whatever cryptocurrency or whatever value, have I faked that in in that counterparty? Sorry, I'm getting a message on my screen that's not on your screen, and it's confusing here. Let me just get rid of this. So we kind of get into sovereign rules now. I told you we were going to touch on this. Sovereign rules mean that the country of origin in a contract may have an issue in something that happens. Smart contracts that are done in the case of Mexico, it would be done across border or in any other country. So then you've got the issue of what do the rules in the US say and what do the rules in the other countries say? We've all seen that there are countries around the world who are changing their rules to be much more restrictive. I think South Korea is kind of getting through this. Japan has kind of come through this. China is wrestling with this issue. Malta has, on the other hand, said, we embrace it. So if we start a smart contract, and let's say it's a multi-year smart contract or even a multi-month smart contract, what happens if the sovereignty of the point of legality changes and something becomes illegal or something is more regulated than it was before? So these are all points that have to be considered in the terms of the contract. Because remember, a smart contract, another way I like to say it is a smart contract is really a smart mechanism. Because remember what we saw before, smart contracts are really just conducting the operative terms. It's carrying out the operative terms, much the way the first derivatives were. A bunch of people decided what should happen, and then the computer systems make it happen. So when we look at the issues with sovereign rules, when the countries change their mind, and you've got millions of dollars at stake, what do? How are we going to adjust that? How are we going to handle that? Contracts have to contemplate these things, which is why they're voluminous, right? I mean, how many people have, read 100-page contracts or more? It's going through the contemplation of everything that could go wrong, and it's a lot of CYA. What happens if? Which makes the transaction costs go up. And what are we trying to do with the smart contract? We're trying to drive them down. We're trying to lower them. So I think as we get into some of this, we're going to start seeing smart contracts that are executed in areas like Malta. We might name a legal venue as being Malta. As long as we both decide, as long as both counterparties decide that we agree on the venue, that's how we're going to settle it. So we might see some of these places, where this might happen. This is by the way, this is one of the big debates going on at the SEC right now. Enforcement at the SEC always likes to keep a huge cloud over, I won't tell you the rules so that you stay 100 miles away from what you think is the rule because it's so cloudy that you'll never know. The regulators are like, hey guys, we need bright lines. Like the criminal code, you need to know when it's robbery or aggravated robbery or assault or aggravated assault, right? There's litmus, there's tests, and you know clearly. This has been a debate that's, for 100 years, the enforcement division has won this argument. We hope that the SEC is forthcoming with this pretty soon, but this is what's happening in sovereign places. And so if you have a smart contract that's dealing with securities law, what do you do? Even if you name it in Malta, you may have an issue at the point you execute the contract if it's, let's say a security coin, right? I think Polymath, we've seen some leaders in this, Polymath, I think T0, we've got the early people the early protocols that are out really trying to wade through some of these issues. And I think legality just kind of follows it. Some important topics to consider, and we've kind of covered this a little bit, but I just want to make sure, the operative terms versus non-operative terms, again, we're trying to drive transaction costs down. I think what we're going to start seeing are the embodiment of these contracts more on-chain. So when I say on-chain, it means, was it recorded in an immutable protocol? One of the things that can happen is we have interoperability. So we may have multiple protocols all doing business with each other. And so just thinking into the future, what we might see are systems that you go decide all your legal contract terms. You weigh it out and you electronically come to a decision and you write the document approved by both parties, because remember, you have to have agreement. That's one of the 4 bases. You have to have offer and acceptance. So we'll come to this offer and acceptance place where maybe that's done in one location and it interoperates with another part that's actually the mechanism, the smart mechanism that's going to create that. This is a big part that we're wrestling with. In terms of transaction costs, one of the biggest problems, and we've all been there, insurance companies don't like to insure what they don't know is going to happen. If an insurance company is confused or they don't have a long history of writing claims and paying claims, the price they give you is going to be silly and wild because it's got to cover them. If they're going to insure it and they don't know what it's going to cost us a lot. So it's going to be important that we bring the insurance regulators along pretty quickly. I can tell you in the case of Factum, for instance, we got ready to write the what we call the E&O, or the errors and omissions policy. When you're a services company, if you give bad advice to somebody and it causes their stuff to break or not make money, the guy or the gal who gave you the advice is liable. So then you wear that hat and you pay that bill. So what we did in the case of Factum is I actually set up what we call a tri-party meeting, and this is the new world of insurance. We brought the underwriter, which the client never talks to the underwriter, right? The broker talks to the underwriter, you talk to the broker, and it's this long chain of telephone, and you hope the message you send is the message that's received by the underwriter. Technology has become so complex, and these concepts and these challenges are just mind-blowing. So what we did is we brought the underwriter to the table, and we actually sat down and tried to explain. I think we did a pretty good job. We actually explained what Factum does and what his risks really were. And we walked through our contracts that we have with our customers to show him where we are preventing risk, where we are taking the risk out of these elements. And by doing that, we were actually able to really lower the cost to insure Factum because he had understanding, because he could see there are things that he's already doing in the insurance world that look like Factum. And so this is what brings down the transaction costs. But when we look at just transaction costs for smart contracts, we're getting into a lot of new stuff. I've just been working with a new group out of New York talking about doing on-chain insurance. And it's exciting. It's very undefined. It's very like, we don't know what the heck's gonna happen, but it is the coming place because we're never gonna get adoption of anything in the enterprise world that's of any significant value unless we can assure that these risks are taken care of, that there is a plan for this, right? Like New York Life or Citibank or name some big enterprise, they're never gonna enter into any contract of any size unless they can be assured of this. Their risk department, guys like me, are just gonna go ape over the fact that they're trying to get something done. I mean, we're going to apoplexy over making these contracts work if there's no way to have somebody who's assuring the risk, because otherwise the enterprise takes that on and you're stuck. So reducing costs is going to be important or smart contracts won't be adopted, because remember, financial costs always seek the lowest point. And we have a pretty entrenched system. We have contracts that you just, you pull up the old contract, you redact the language, you add the new people, you're ready to go. That doesn't exist yet today, and so it's actually an elevated cost to this stuff. The self-executing layer versus state of system. A lot of people think that self-executing layers like Ethereum. So basically, you set it all up, and then it's the old set it and forget it. You don't have to go back and touch it. Any contract, whether it's all off-chain or it's on-chain, off-chain, is really the state of the system at any one point. And we're getting better tools, we're getting better realization. Self-executing is not a bad thing, but it's not the only thing. And I think that the industry is gonna continue to wrestle with this, and we're gonna come up with best of breed. We've talked a little bit about on-chain and off-chain. The hard thing is the assurance of the off-chain information, whether it's parties or payment or delivery or action. We're working with one of our customers in China. They're a customer of our partner OneCloud in China, but they have integrated their warehouse management system with their transportation management system. So they know when it leaves the warehouse, it goes on a truck, they know the quantity, the volume, everything like that. It's then assured by RFID tags on the merchandise. So when it arrives to me, let's say I'm the buyer, it arrives to me, I can take my near-field communication device, I can go check, oh, I'm supposed to receive 100 bolts of cloth or whatever is being delivered, and then I can count, make sure it's 100 bolts. Then I can go online with that RFID tag, and I can provide electronic proof that I received it. So we're working on methods to get better and better on-chain information so that more of this is on-chain. And this is what's happening in the stablecoin world as well, right? I think Paul Snow, in another conversation, started talking about something that's possible on the Factom protocol. So the entire protocol, not just Factom Inc., but the entire protocol could support a completely on-chain stablecoin. First time ever, brand new asset, doesn't exist in the world today. I've tried to classify it, trust me, it doesn't exist. It's really unique. And that's because the protocol would allow that. So anybody using the Factom protocol would have these kinds of completely on-chain stablecoins that you can involve with means of exchange. You could make it as a payment. You could assure it. You could even use it as an oracle, right? There's just so many things that are possible once you put everything on-chain. And this is the hope, right? The hope is that eventually we get to the fact that everything's on-chain. And this is one of the big debates out there. Can you ever have anything that's on-chain? So on the that early side, when we talk about offer and acceptance, I physically am still off-chain. You could never put me on-chain, I hope. I mean, I guess that's what Tron was about. But, you know, barring you can get me on-chain, I'm always going to be off-chain. But we have meta-transactions. So when computer systems and AI systems start executing contracts between themselves based on other rules and events, reorder points, self-ordering systems, right, all these kinds of things, we may very well get to the place that there are smart contracts that are completely on-chain because the identities start with automated systems that are themselves identities on-chain. Interesting idea to consider. This is what lowers transaction costs because everything is provable, everything is discoverable, right? In provenance, we prove the negative. I can tell you as an auditor, that's huge. And I think we've talked through some of the sovereign versus the protocol versus the oracle risks. These things are going to have to get insured, and much more is going to be written on this. The early conversations, it's a lot of sausage. It's not pretty. When we start talking through the enforcement mechanisms behind this, guess what? People and company names keep coming up, and these are the people that don't want to target on them. If they're going to execute these contracts and they're going to insure them, like self-insure them, that's where we're starting to see a lot of risk. We're looking. I don't want to. I'm excited about this topic. I want to make sure that we're not over covering these things. We've talked through most of this. I think we're good. It might just be. I think we'll stop there. Why don't we open it up to Q&A? Because I think that's probably going to be more effective at this point. You have a good basis for what's going on in the smart contract world, where the fights are, what we have yet to solve. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to take that. I could cover more, but at this point, anybody who's got some ideas or anything, I'm completely open to another consideration. We have a brave gentleman stepping forward.
Okay, it's not on.
Okay.
Do you think there's an area where some of these legalities are minimized and maybe a very simple use case where we'll see smart contracts actually be upholdable in court and meet legal needs?
So the question really is are there simple use cases I think that would probably kick this whole thing off that are enforceable yeah. The first one is going to be where parties trust each other. It's probably going to start in places where companies that are already doing business with each other have a defined method and they have a good comfort of what's happening. And a lot of the other risks are pretty much defined because that's we always start with these places of comfort. It probably is going to come with low dollar volume transactions in the financial world, and I'm looking at asset lending being probably the first place that starts. Think of it like factoring, where companies have some amount of asset on their books, either a receivable or some small dollar thing. But there are companies out there who that's their business is they aggregate a lot of this across small companies, and so they're taking on defined risks. The contracts for a factoring are still going to be on paper, but the execution of either payment or receipt of the loan, like that, stuff like that is going to do that. One of the OneCloud customers in China, we have a bank that is ready to lend against the delivery, that thing I talked to you about earlier with the transportation management system. So stuff like that, I think, Carl, is probably going to be the place that it starts, and we're gonna look for that. You know, small ideas that will grow. Yeah.
Is there a blockchain where those off-chain documents can be secured?
It's a little bit of a softball question there, but Factum, we think has the Factum protocol. Factum Inc. is one of the companies. There are many great companies. We're one of the companies operating on the Factum protocol. The idea that you store data and that data is configured in ways that it's secured and you can get back to it easily. The cost to reconcile it. These are all factors in where data should be kept. The Factum protocol makes that really, really easy and really, really remarkable. It also stores identities. And they're just, look, the Factum blockchain was built to be that, moving van that has a Jeep chassis on it that, climb over hills and move a lot of stuff, right? It was built for data. There are other protocols that, are Ferraris, and they're built to do what Ferraris do. But you don't want to shove all your data into the Ferrari and call it a moving vehicle for mountains, right? It just doesn't work. And so that's what we're struggling through, is a lot of people pivot, a lot of people want to take a protocol they're familiar with and try to turn it into something else. And Factum was built for data, and we don't try to do all the other things. It'll do a lot. We just know our strengths, and the Factum protocol plays to that. Yes, ma'am, you had a question. That's a great question. The question, as I understand it, is how likely is it for these financial houses to move on chain and begin to adopt these contracts? So we've seen two different cases of that I'm aware of that I think are applicable to that question. One, we saw NASDAQ hired Blockstream to come in and do a project to look at it. I have a little bit of an issue with the technology because I don't think it's a blockchain solution. I think it's an accounting solution. So what they're really looking for is a distributed architecture that we have all these subledgers, without getting into all the stock exchange, you got all these subledgers and you have to settle them out at the end of the day, and then they all have to settle back so that when you get ready to pay dividends, you know who to write the dividend check to, right? So NASDAQ is looking to Blockstream to basically help them self-total these independent ledgers and then roll them up at the end of the day. It's not a consensus mechanism. It's a blockchain accounting system without consensus. But so they operate a private network. The other one that I saw recently, the settlement clearing engine for all the checks that we write, and electronic checks mostly today, but checks that are written, it's about $11 trillion problem. It's a big number, but it's broken up by thousands of financial institutions. They've turned to another company called Axon, or Axoni, I guess. And Axoni is writing some private, and we didn't get into public versus private blockchains, but I think everybody's somewhat familiar with that. They're looking at a series of private blockchains to help them in this settlement effort. But the interesting thing about both of these cases is they don't really use the power of the blockchain. The reason to have the distributed ledger is that there's a public witness. And the reason you have a public witness is so nobody can change anything. Right? How many times have we seen contracts where they cheat? They cheat the contract. Something changes, right? Paul Snow, the CEO of our company, has a favorite expression that says, you're never smart enough to lie in the moment. So you have to lie after, right? Once you know what you're trying to avoid or what you're trying to cheat yourself out of, then you go back and you fiddle with the record a little bit. So it's going to be interesting that both these companies that are dealing with these large amounts of financial information have chosen to do this in a private way. I don't know if that's, ease of use. They don't want to expose the problem. If they do find fraud, they don't want, NASDAQ certainly doesn't want to know if somebody's cheating one of the ledgers. They don't want to publish that. They take care of, there's, 11 layers in any stock transaction that have to go down and up, and it's a mess. So a lot of reasons, but I think what you'll see, and I think you're already starting to see this, is the preference now is to put things on chain where they're publicly exposed, so that you know that it's immutable. The record is immutable. The Factom protocol is an excellent engine to come in and be that public witness if you hash into it, right? And so I think there are public solutions that will work in tandem with that. Look, we've seen R3, a private chain banking mechanism that's really struggling to get adoption. People are throwing around the C word, collusion. What happens when you have limited node consensus? Is it really consensus, or is it just the old guy network, the old buddy network coming together? Is it cronyism? So we'll see. I think we're all waiting to see, but I think that proof off chain is going to be the interesting part. Yes, sir. Primarily, good question. Are smart contracts auditable? Are there smart contracts out there that aren't auditable, and where am I seeing that? I think is that fair? The auditability mainly right now comes from identity. We have a lot of people working on identity, so it will get better. But when you have keys that roll over, so if you're using a key that, using the seed, but you're changing your identity so that you are not discoverable in any sort of pattern or sort of method like that, not all protocols support the ability to go back and prove that the representation of that identity at that moment in time in that contract actually was the right identity, or to what degree was that identity certified. And what has to happen in an audit situation is that the identities have to be provable to the auditor. You don't get to go, oh, wait, stop the audit, give me a few weeks, I'm going to go round this up after the fact. What the auditor actually has to do is make sure that in the moment, when the contract executed, when there was conveyance of exchange, whatever you paid for, you knew then that it was a problem. That's what FinCEN and the BSA and a lot of these guys, because fraud occurs in two ways. It is either preventable, meaning the light goes off and says, whoa, wait a minute, this is not good, or it's discoverable, meaning after the fact, we then can become aware of it and correct for it. So given that those are the two methods, the problem in discoverable fraud is you may not be able to undo the transaction. You may not have recourse. And so, we're starting to see that, and it hasn't been done a lot. I think Ethereum is really suspect to this. It's a problem they've gotten. Part of the Ethereum process is to forget the past. Because you've got to read through all these smart contracts. And by the way, every time you tokenize a smart contract, you have two signatures. And so you can follow the signature, you can bounce it through the system, or if you roll these identities, then you can't follow it. And so you get a year down the road, you go through the audit a year later, you may not be able to get back to the record of the truth. So in a system like Factom, where the entry credit, it's a two-token system, the entry credit gets thrown away, the chain that those identities are on in the protocol means that you can go back up the protocol and you can see who signed it, and if the documentation of the identity is stored on chain, you actually go all the way back to the hash. You can go back to the identity company and go, oh, there it is. That's the identity, and then you audit the identity company, or you just ask for proof, which they do, then you've got it. So that's really, I think, the big problem right now. But as we get to larger and larger contracts, and look, the auditors aren't prepared to audit this stuff, right? They know that it's a problem, but it's, I've had conversations with all the big four, and they all know that this is an issue. The thing that they can't do is a lot of them, PwC has it, a lot of the others don't, but the ability to have an audit standard, because the auditor has to perform to a standard, they have to have what's called a criteria. There is no finding without a criteria, like a benchmark. Like, This is the thing that should have happened. This is the rule that should have been followed. They don't have that set up yet. When auditors get smarter and really just adopt the industry, they're already smart people, I didn't mean that. When they figure out how to adopt the industry into their standards, then we'll see more testing. Right now, as long as the contract settles out, nobody really has an issue with it. And look, a lot of this stuff is just starting, so the audit trail is gonna come along. Right now, auditors kind of throw up their hands and go, it's just not in scope. It's not in scope for the audit. They reconcile the bank account, and as long as cash transacted or value transacted in the property ledger, they call it good. They just check the box. And so, that's part of the issue. And we're gonna have to adopt these standards into what we do in order that identities are auditable. Kind of the way that it works. We could go deeper, but it puts people to sleep. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. The question is, I think, how hard is it, how difficult is it for banks to work in this business model with smart contracts? Yeah. Thank you for keeping me honest. The patent field, first of all, is so backed up that it's 5 years from the time you file a patent right now in the blockchain industry before it's even reviewed. So the banks, Bank of America has the most that I've seen. Bank of America doesn't even operate with those patents yet. They haven't been awarded. They've been filed for, they have yet to be awarded. Now there are some early ones that a long time ago are starting to get awarded. Insurance is the problem. So they're trying to figure out right now the insurance problem. So if they entered a smart contract and any of those things that we went through in terms of risk, like what if somebody got the code and the protocol wrong and it's published under the MIT standard? There's no recourse. So does Bank of America just eat it? Banks aren't really used to eating things, right? Cash is their raw material. ROA on a bank, the return on assets for a bank is huge. So cash, you don't lose cash in a bank because that kills you. There's no ROE if there's no ROA, right? Return on equity. So that's the big problem right now, is that they don't know how to insure that risk. They know it's coming. They want the cheaper costs. We're all figuring it out. All right, thank you guys. Thanks, great audience. Thank you.